Welcome to the Chase Podcast. Dr. Ron Charles is a renowned archaeologist, author, historian, speaker, missionary, and is known as the Christian Indiana Jones. Dr. Charles has spent over 50 years researching and uncovering truths about Jesus Christ and information that proves the historical authenticity of the Bible. Visit cubitfoundation.org for Dr. Ron's books and information about this global ministry.
Let's look at John, the 11th chapter. Very familiar story. Be looking at it from a little bit different perspective, though. We're not going to be reading the entire chapter, but we are going to read some verses in the chapter. We'll begin to read verse number 1. This is John, the 11th chapter. Verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus, of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. Now this was on the southeast side of the Mount of Olives, the location. Jesus was ministering on the the east side of the Jordan River, called Judea beyond Jordan, which was a good day's ride on an animal, and even more so if you're walking. And but Lazarus was a friend of Jesus. Lazarus at this time was 30 years old. Mary at this time was 16. Martha was 14. And so Jesus had become good friends of the family. What Lazarus did for a living, we don't know. And we do know that Bethany was quite active in the medical field, and I'll explain that to you a little bit later on, so let's continue to read. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment, wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sisters sent unto him, or said to Jesus, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. So this was the messenger that they sent to find Jesus, which was, like I said, about an hour away. About a day away by animal, more so than by foot. And it seems that he was on an animal of some sort when he found him. Then Jesus heard that Lazarus, or he was sick. Then Jesus said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now let's look at verse number 11. These things said he, and after he saith unto them, our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go, and that I may awaken him out of sleep. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. Albeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking of rest in sleep. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. So Jesus knew that Lazarus was dead when he received the message, that he was sick. He had already died. Now let's look at verse number 39. Jesus said, take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. And Jesus saith unto her, said I not unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shalt see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and feet with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. And Jesus said unto them, Loose him, and let him go. Now, back during the day of the Persian Empire, Cyrus, the Persian emperor, allowed some of the captives, if not all of the captives who wanted to go, to leave, and they could be resettled in their home countries as long as that home country was under the rule of Persia. The Jews were part of those people. 1/3 of the Jews stayed in Persia. They didn't want to move. Another third went to Israel, and there you remember under Zerubbabel, they had a new temple built, and under Nehemiah, the walls were rebuilt and so forth. And so that was that 1/3 that went there. Another third went to Egypt. And at that time, Persia was under the control of Egypt. Cyrus gave them an island. The island was called the Island of Elephantine. It was down by near the present city of Aswan. It was near where the dam is now. It was a huge island. Now a lot of it's covered because of the dam waters, but at one time it was quite large, and that was given to the Jews by Cyrus. So they settled there and developed their own society, a Jewish society in the very middle of Egypt, which is quite unique. They even built a temple there, and they had their own celebrations, their own holy days, and so forth. But as time went on, they began to compromise with the locals. You know, here in America, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't celebrate Christmas, regardless of whether they're a believer or not. They like that day off, okay? And so the Jews started doing the same thing. They liked that day off. And so they began to not only honor their own celebrations, but also the Egyptian celebrations, and begin to adopt some of the Egyptian ways and some of the Egyptian philosophies. And they even allowed some of the Egyptians' statues of Pharaoh initially, and then even the gods and goddesses to be planted in Elephantine to show that we are Jewish, but we also honor you. And so it was a kind of a Judo-Egyptian existence and a society. And one of the ways that one of the cultural things that they adopted was quite unique to the Jews. The Jews normally buried everybody within 24 hours of death, but the Egyptian Jews followed the Egyptian method of burial. And you all know what that is, the mummies thing. And I'll explain that to you in a bit. But that was one of the things that they adopted. Okay, now in 62 BC, 64 BC, dictator Sulla absolutely hated the Jews. He hated them with a hatred beyond anything you can imagine. And he says to his council, which Mark Antony was part of that council, and as well as Augusta, he said, I am going to exterminate these Jews, and I will exterminate every one of them who lives on the earth. And I will start with Egypt, with the community Elephantine, and we will gain back that land for us. Mark Antony was quite concerned about this. He had relatives who were Jewish, and not close, but still relatives. And so Mark Antony at that time was the governor of the region that we began to call Judea, Samaria, the Galilee, and all of that. So he owned that area and governed it for Rome. And he appealed to Sulla. He says, let me have the Jews of Egypt, and I will settle them in my territory. So Sulla gave, at a time of weakness, he says, he gave the Jews in Egypt to Mark Antony. So he had them moved over to the Judea area, and he gave them, on behalf of Rome, the southeast side of the Mount of Olives. And there they built the city of Bethany. They became a ward of Rome. And so they still maintained their Jewish traditions, their Jewish religion, and so forth, but they were under the protection of Rome, particularly Mark Antony. And there were some stipulations that went up. First of all, you could not own property in Bethany unless you were an Egyptian Jew or had an ancestry of Egyptian Jew. If you did have property there, that meant that you were an Egyptian Jew. There was no other people could own property there except Egyptian Jews or Egyptian Jew heritage. You couldn't spend the night there without an invitation from someone who lived there, an Egyptian Jew who was there. Now, Egyptian Jews were not demanded. It wasn't commanded for them to live there, but it was a privilege for them to live there if they wanted to do so. I mean, you could live any place, but if you lived in Bethany or in that area, it was a major deal. It was a good thing, and it was a very good thing. And so this is where Lazarus and Mary and Martha lived. They were Egyptian Jews, and they lived there. Another thing about Bethany that was quite amazing is that Bethany was the home of the very first almshouse. Now, almshouse is a hospital, which means that private individuals, whether it be Egyptian Jews or Romans or anyone else, or any Jews, they could reduce their tax liabilities by going to the almshouse and paying money to them for the care of the sick, and they would get credit against their taxes. And so some people try to say that Lazarus was the director of this almshouse, and some people say he was a businessman or whatever. We know that they treated multiple diseases there. They treated leprosy. They also treated diseases of the lungs and various other plague-type things. And it was probably at one time, I would say, at least for 1,000 years from the time that it was founded in 63 A.D., that it was probably the most prolific, the greatest, and the most effective hospital in the entire world. And so that is Bethany. Now, Lazarus and Mary and Martha lived in Bethany. Jesus was ministering on the east side of the Jordan River. Well, the girls sent a messenger to Jesus. It took them a day to get there, a day to find Jesus. And when he found Jesus, Jesus gave him a very interesting statement. Well, Lazarus died while this messenger was en route. He was still alive when he left the girls, but as he made his way to Jesus, Lazarus died. But there weren't any cell phones in that day, so he didn't know anything about it. When he got to Jesus, he told Jesus about the situation, about Lazarus, and this is what Jesus told him. Knowing that Lazarus is already dead, he said, "You go back and tell the girls that this sickness is not unto death." Now, the messenger was all excited. He turned around and ran back. Got to the girls, to the home. "I got great news for you. I found Jesus, and I got great news. He said for me to tell you that this sickness was not unto death, but that God would be glorified." And they said, "Well, we appreciate that, but our brother died the very day that you left. And by the way, where is Jesus?" "Well, he didn't come back with me." Now, all of you who are believers in here, When you get sick, what do you do first thing? The first thought that comes across your mind is Jesus. Okay? Now, I realize some of you may be like me. If I get sick, I got a headache, I take an aspirin and pray. I don't care which one works. But generally, believers go to the Lord. And is there any doubt in your mind that he don't hear you? Now, there are those times he doesn't do it immediately, but there's no doubt in my mind that he doesn't hear. He hears our prayer. There's no doubt in these girls' mind that Jesus wouldn't come back. None at all. And then he wasn't there. Well, did he say when he was going to come? No, I'm sorry, he didn't. Well, did he send back anything that we should do? No. He just says this was not unto death, and then that was it, and I left. Well, how about maybe he's coming later on in the week? He didn't say whether he was coming or not. And he didn't. He stayed at least 2 more days, then took another day to get back. The Egyptian Jews had a very unique method of burial. It was not the Jewish method. It was more the Egyptian method. On day 1, the day of death, the body was cut open. And out of the body was taken the brain, was taken the eyeballs, the tongue, the lungs, and the heart. And then pumped back, and then the blood was drained out. Pumped back into the veins and the vessels and the cavities where these organs were was a solution of vinegar and wine and honey and sometimes frankincense, sometimes myrrh. And that it was kind of like embalming fluid, and they would pump it through the whole body, and then once that was done, they sewed the body back up. Then the body organs then were placed in a pottery jar, and the pottery jar was also filled with the same type of solution, and they sealed the pottery jar. And then after that, they put rosums and gums and that type of stuff on the body, and then wrapped it with linen. Yeah, you've all seen mummies in that method. Have a separate covering for the face, separate napkin type thing, and then then after that they wrap the whole body, and they wrap them layer after layer after layer. And so after the first layer, they put more gums and rosins, and then the second layer, and then they put them again, and then the next layer. History tells us, the early church history tells us that Lazarus had 18 layers of linen. So a body that would initially be this big ended up being that big. And a body that was initially weighed 150 pounds now weighed 300. The Egyptian Jews had a different type of burial process in tombs also. They did entomb. They didn't have ossuaries or any of that type of thing. And if you ever get a chance to go to Israel, you can go to Lazarus' tomb. You can still see it. And what it is, it's the Egyptian Jewish tombs had two compartments. You had an upper compartment, which is about maybe a 7 by 7, and in that compartment, which is ground level, that's where the pottery jar of the organs would be placed. And then you go down 40 steps. Sometimes it was a straight staircase. Sometimes it was an L shape. Lazarus is L shape. You go down a set of steps, have a little landing, and go down the rest of them. Then you had the bottom chamber. The bottom chamber was about a 15 by 15. And in that bottom chamber, was a sarcophagus or a burial box. Now, the 40 steps represented the 40 years in the wilderness, with Moses leading them. And so that's why it was significant for the Egyptian Jews for this type of burial. And so once you got down to the bottom chamber, then a sarcophagus was there made of stone. The sarcophagus stood up about 1 meter, a little over a yard, and was about approximately 8 feet long. And then it was about plus or minus 5 to 6 feet wide. And you would lay the body or the mummy inside that sarcophagus, and then you put a stone lid on top of it and seal it with beeswax. And then after that was done, then the body was interned completely. Now, the first day, the day that the organs were removed, is when the family had their private times with the one who had died. The second day, and he would be at home. He wasn't placed in the sarcophagus until day 4. Okay, and so the first day was with the family. The second day with family members who were in the region. The third day, friends and relatives who in the region could come, and or distant relatives. And then the fourth day is the day of burial. And the reason for that is that the Egyptian Jews had a teaching, and they said that God had the ability to raise anyone from the dead, if they're dead, regardless what happens to the body. But once the body begins to decay, which is on day 4, and that means that God has given the body over to Satan to destroy, and that God himself could not raise from the dead on day 4 and beyond. Jesus arrived on the day of the funeral. The day in which not even God could raise him. So he got there, but he got there with no hope. He got there without not even a promise that I was going to do this to these girls. It would just been better off if he'd not show up at all. You know, in our lives, sometimes we get that. Lord, I needed you at 8 o'clock. Now it's 5 o'clock. I don't need you no more. Just forget it. The girls were, I can't imagine how they felt. Their greatest friend, their only hope, their greatest hope was nowhere to be found during their major time of crisis. And now, when it was far too late to do anything about it, he shows up. Now, that don't make no sense. Lazarus was put down in the sarcophagus box. They went back up to the upper chamber and sealed the tomb, put a stone over the top of it and sealed it up. Now, the Romans were meticulous in their record keeping, especially with wards of Rome, because they had to pay taxes. And these taxes included a death tax, a burial tax, and a witness tax. So a Roman official was there to not only collect these taxes, but also to make sure that the grave was now sealed with Roman government approval. Pontius Pilate sent one of his court personnel, administrators, who was also a court recorder, whose name was Cyrilius. And so Cyrilius was present at this funeral. And he was present primarily to seal the deal and to collect the taxes. but he was also there to record historically about everything that had happened and what was taking place. So I'm going to refer to some of the writings of Cyrilius as we paint this picture of Lazarus and Jesus and what happened. Cyrilius told us that on the day of that funeral, there were over 3,000 people that showed up. 3,000 to pay their respects to this great man, Lazarus. Perhaps he was the administrator at the almshouse, the hospital. We don't know. But he had enough that there were 3,000 there. Then he talks about this man from this rabbi who was from the Galilee, but who was friends of the family of Lazarus, Jesus by name. And he seems to come to comfort the girls primarily. And then he told one of the girls, Martha, Martha was 14 years old, told her to remove the stone. Well, that stone only weighed about 500 pounds. And Jesus did not offer to help her. He just told her what to do. We don't know how the stone got pulled away, but we do know that it did. And then Cyrilius made this statement. And then the rabbi from the Galilee, he stood in the open top chamber, or outside of the open top chamber. And to the top of his lungs, he screamed, "Lazarus, come forth!" And then he stood and he waited. Now, according to the Word of God, the next thing we see is Lazarus standing in the front open door of the top chamber. But he still had his mummy outfit on. Okay? How did he get there? Now, Jesus didn't wiggle his nose and poof, there he was. Jesus did things naturally. Supernatural, natural. Okay. Lazarus was wrapped up with 18 layers of linen. He couldn't bend his knees. He couldn't use his arms. And he was in a box that was sealed. The first job was to get the box sealed, get the top of the box off. And how do you do that? You bump your head against it for a while? We don't know. But eventually he got the top off, and then he rolled out of this thing. But then once he rolled out, he was dead when they brought him down there. So where are the stairs? I don't know. I was dead when I came down here. So then now he has to find the stairs. And once he finds the stairs, then he has to get up the stairs. And he can't move his knees. So what do? And how many times do you fall back down and start all over again? Cyrilius tells us that Jesus stood in his position in front of the open door without saying another word for 3.5 hours. Okay? Now, the only thing Lazarus had to go on was Jesus' voice one time that he heard when he was dead. Lazarus didn't hear the voice of Jesus again. You know, so many of us believers today We think we have to hear the voice of God at least every 3 hours, or else, Lord, don't you still love me? Don't you care, Lord? But Lazarus didn't hear it again. And he had to go to his light, to his life, by hearing the voice of Jesus one time only. Jesus had done his job. He had given him a new heart. He had given him new life. The old things were passed away and all things were new. He gave him a new vision, new eyes. He gave him a new way of talking with a new tongue, a new way of thinking with a new brain, new breath in this new body with new lungs. So Jesus had done everything that he needed to do. But Lazarus was still bound up. Even when he got to the door, the freedom that was there, he was still bound up. And Jesus did not loosen those bands. But he looked over at the girls, and he looked over at the friends, and those that were there that were left, and told them, you loose him. Now, interesting scenario. Some of the people that were there were saying, we got him now. We don't care if he goes to the mental institution or to prison. We have him. This is it. There were others that were there that says, I was really beginning to believe in this man. But now, I don't much think so. So they left. Others were there, and they said, what happened? He healed the blinded eyes. He walked on water. He cleansed the lepers. Why was this a failure? I don't know. I'll have to think about this. They left. But the ones who stayed, which were just under 500, those who stayed were eyewitnesses to one of the greatest miracles that has ever happened in the history of mankind. The ones who stayed when there was no reason to stay, when there was no guarantee that anything would get better, and that seems like the only thing that was happening is just more insanity. Jesus told those friends, loose him. This church on Fridays and throughout your ministry here in Amarillo, you have a lot of people come through those doors that has a whole bunch of bondage. They come in with a lot of baggage, with their eyes covered with a napkin, and layer after layer after layer after layer of garbage. Well, you can take your chainsaw and try to cut it off all at once. But when you do that, you run the possibility of killing them spiritually, running them off, and they never, ever will recover. Or you take one layer at a time and remove it. Now that's where it takes patience. We've learned that in Egypt. We've been there 30 years. We minister in Egypt as well as use Egypt as a springboard to go into other Islamic countries. And boy, you talk about bondage. When some of those folks come and accept Jesus, shoo, they got stuff in their lives that is beyond your comprehension, beyond our comprehension. And sometimes the only thing you can do is just to tell them, I love you. We'll start there. They don't have new believers follow-up courses. They're now among the halls of the persecuted. They've accepted Jesus, and they've turned their back on Allah and Muhammad. So now they're the enemy. The only thing they have is the bandages. But they know that their Jesus died for them. You know, in the Islamic world, when some of the persecuted are scheduled to be their last day on earth, 2 witnesses are called. You have one witness of a believer, which would be an Islamic person. Then the other witness is an infidel. And I have been called as the infidel witness on numerous occasions. It's not too far-fetched to say that your night is ruined, certainly after that. There's pounding on the doors at 2 o'clock in the morning, handcuffed, come with me. And when you get to that appointed place, there would be your friends there. They're standing there handcuffed. And now that the witnesses are there, they can go through with the bullet to the brain or the knife across the throat. And inevitably, the first question that they ask when I get there, inevitably, is, does Jesus still love me? You say, absolutely. They don't ask, then what am I doing here? They don't ask, then why was I arrested? They don't ask, then why hasn't he delivered me? They're satisfied with the answer that yes, Jesus loves you. That's it. That's enough. But then the next question, always, is Jesus here? Absolutely. He'll never leave you, and he'll never forsake you. Now, you may be meeting him in just a few seconds. And if so, he'll take you in his arms, and he'll hug you, and he'll love you. If you live to see another day, then you have to wait. And these folks come with baggages that you would not believe, but Jesus still loves them anyway. And as they die for him, they die with the joy of knowing that their God cares very much. 3,000 people began, 500 stayed. And those 500 were responsible for then taking care of releasing the bonds of this man who was once dead, but now he's alive. You know, we had a situation that happened when Muslim Brotherhood came into as government of Egypt. In 5 garbage cities, 4 million people lived who had turned their back on Islam and accepted Jesus, but that was their home. Well, when Muslim Brotherhood came in, some of the real zealous hotshots, they said, we are going to exterminate Christianity once and for all. We will clear out the garbage cities, and we will burn down the villages. And they had some support. But some of the cooler heads told the new president, you can't do that. If you do that, every government in the world will become your enemy. What we recommend is to pick one village. If we do that, if we eliminate the one village, America will be upset, Britain will be upset, we'll be condemned by the United Nations, but 2 weeks later, everything will be back to normal. So that's what they determined to do. They went out, sent representatives out to the village, and told them what was going to happen on a certain date. They would be eliminated, and they had to get their house in order, get their souls in order, because this is what's going to happen. Well, I was in Dubai. I got a call from one of these guys and telling me what was happening, and they wanted me to come back to see what I could do about stopping it. And I said, what can I do? I mean, you're talking about the government. What can I do? But I felt led to go back anyway. So I called my wife and told her what was going on. And on my flight back to Cairo, I started reading these portions in John, the 11th chapter. And the thing that exploded in my brain and I couldn't get away from is, this is not unto death. I couldn't figure out how. How was this not going to be unto death, since it had already been established, already been proclaimed, the date had already been set, everything had been done. It's too late. But it wouldn't go away. This is not unto death. I felt along the way I needed to meet with the terrorist groups. Excuse me. Muslim Brotherhood was the administrative government at that time, but they also had working with them Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and Hezbollah, and portions of ISIS. And so I said, the Holy Spirit said, you need to meet with these guys. I said, why? When I landed, I made arrangements, and later on that day, I met with these terrorists in a public place, needless to say. And when I walked in, I extended my hand. The guy from Al-Qaeda was the spokesman. I introduced myself, and he didn't shake my hand. He said, we know who you are. Now, what do you want? And I said, well, I need your permission for something. Permission? What do you mean permission? And then he held out his hand. He says, you see this? You are standing in my hand. And at any time I want to, I can crush you. And that should cause you great, great fear. And I said, yeah, you're right. Except you have one thing wrong. I am standing in a hand, but the hand I'm standing in is the hand of God. And only He can crush me. And that should cause you great fear. He says, what do you want? I said, like I said, I need your permission. For what? I said, I have some people that I want to help. Well, if they're people that you want to help, they must be Christian. I said, I'm not going to tell you that. But this is what I want from you. You know, we've been accustomed to it for 25 years. We're followed all of the time. They stay out in front of our house, our flat, and they tap our telephone. We can't even go to the market without them being there. They follow us continually and hassle and do all of this stuff. And I told them, I said, I want you to leave me alone for 2 days and 2 nights. Just leave me alone. No one follows me. No one listens to my phone. No one goes behind me in a car. No one stays in front of my house. No one. For 2 days and 2 nights. He says, you think I have this authority? I said, yes. What I know is this, is that whoever you say lives, they live. Whoever you say die, they die. And now I'm asking you for this permission to do this, that I can function without your interference. You recognize my authority? I said, yes, I do. And you think I can fulfill this? I said, yes. He said, okay. You cannot ask for anything more, but I will give you 2 days and 2 nights. And he was, unbelievably, he was true to his word. He left me alone. I went out to the village, talked to them, and told them, I want you to be ready 2 nights from now, around midnight. We're going to get out of here. I called my wife. She started having people all over the world pray that the Lord would make me invisible. So I hired 100 camels. There were, and when I showed up with the camels at the village, there were 127 people there. So we had to double up. But you know, we've been in Egypt for, like I said, 30 years. And I have never seen fog in the desert. Never. I've never. But that night, it was so foggy that I could barely see the ears of my camel. You could see nothing. So we got to the appointed place, and the people cleared out the village, and I got on the camels, and I was going to take them down to Chad to be delivered to some Bedouin believers down there who would take care of them. And so the first checkpoint in the desert we came to was a Muslim Brotherhood checkpoint. And the only thing he saw was that I was riding a camel. Then he heard other camels back there. He says, "What are you doing?" He said, "What are you doing with these?" He said, "How many camels do you have?" I said, "I have 100." 100 camels. What? Give me your purchase receipt. I said, "I have no purchase receipt. I hired these." And he said, "You have contraband?" I said, No contraband. Guns? No guns. We have to check. And so he sent his men down the row of camels. While he was doing that, I started complaining to God. I said, "Lord, my wife has been praying that I be invisible. And I am not invisible. They saw me. They talked to me. And now they're going to find these people, and I'm going to be arrested. They're going to be arrested. And now we did all of this for nothing." Said, "These people will die before the night is over." So he came back. He said, "Is this all?" I said, "What you see is what I have." He says, "Go." And so the Lord chose not to make me visible. He just chose to make the people invisible. And whether it was because of the thick fog or because God gave the soldiers blinders or he put walls up so no one could see them, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. but they were delivered safely. And the Lord was glorified. There are those times that you'll be dealing with these people that the situation will be helpless and helpless. But it's during that time that we rely upon His Word when He tells us to do it, and that He will provide the means and the way and the opportunity. Pastor, thank you so much.
The Chase with Dr. Ron Charles is sponsored by supporters of the Cubit Foundation. Visit cubitfoundation.org for Dr. Ron's books and discover how you can support this global ministry.